Senior Instructor Vorath had seen many things in his 40 years at the Galactic Coalition Combat Academy, but he had never seen anything quite like the message that arrived on his datapad that morning. A human was coming to join the Elite Hazard Response Program. He read the message 3 times, because surely there had been some mistake. Surely Command had confused his Advanced Combat Division with some beginner orientation course meant for primitive species still learning to tie their boots. But no, the orders were clear, and they came directly from Coalition High Command itself, stamped with 7 official seals and marked as priority communication. Vorath stood in his office and looked out the window at the training grounds below, where cadets from dozens of species practiced their combat drills under the purple sky of Station Nexus 7. He watched a Krethian soldier lift a boulder twice his size, while a team of Velari scouts moved through an obstacle course with their 4 legs, carrying them at speeds no human could ever hope to match. These were real soldiers, real warriors from species that had earned their place among the stars, through millions of years of evolution and thousands of years of warfare. And now Command wanted him to babysit a human? He filed a formal objection within the hour, carefully explaining that humans had only achieved interstellar travel 6 cycles ago, and that their species had no business in an elite program designed for the Coalition's finest warriors. He pointed out that humans were soft and fragile, and that their lifespans were so short that by the time one of them mastered basic combat theory, they would already be too old to fight. The response from Command came back in less than 10 minutes. Request denied. Proceed with integration of human trainee. Political considerations require compliance. Do not file further objections. Political considerations. Vorath's 3 hearts beat with frustration as he understood what this truly meant. Earth had recently been granted a seat on the Coalition Council, and someone in the Diplomatic Corps had decided that including a human in the prestigious Hazard Response Program would be a nice gesture to keep the new members happy. It was not about training a soldier at all. It was about making politicians feel good about themselves, while Vorath wasted his time on a species that would probably faint at the sight of real combat. The human arrived 3 days later on a transport shuttle from Earth's orbital station. Her name was Captain Elise Chun, and she was the most unremarkable creature Vorath had ever seen. She stood barely tall enough to reach his chest, and her body was covered in that strange soft skin that humans had instead of proper scales or armor plating. Her eyes were small and forward-facing like a predator's eyes, but everything else about her screamed prey animal. During the orientation session, Vorath tested her basic capabilities and found them laughably insufficient. Her reflexes were slow compared to even the weakest Krethian recruit, and her night vision was so poor that she needed artificial light enhancement just to see in standard dim conditions. She had no natural weapons, no venom glands, no armored plates, no ability to regenerate lost limbs. She was perhaps the most poorly equipped soldier he had ever been forced to train. And yet she smiled through the entire evaluation, as if she did not understand how badly she had performed. She asked questions constantly, wanting to know about the station's layout and the training schedule and the history of the academy. She seemed genuinely curious about everything around her in a way that Vorath found deeply irritating. Did she not realize that she was an embarrassment to herself and her species? Did she not see how the other trainees looked at her with barely hidden contempt? The Krethian soldiers whispered jokes about the soft one when they thought she could not hear them. The Velari scouts made bets about how long she would last before washing out. Even the administrative staff seemed to pity her. But Captain Chun just kept smiling and asking her endless questions and treating everyone around her with a friendliness that made no tactical sense whatsoever. Vorath decided to assign her to Training Pod 7. This was where he put all the marginal candidates, the ones who had barely qualified for the program and whose statistics suggested would never survive the Certification process. It was not technically against regulations to place her there, but everyone in the academy understood what an assignment to Pod 7 meant. It meant you were not expected to succeed. It meant the instructors had already given up on you. Chun received her pod assignment and simply nodded and thanked him for the information. She did not complain or protest or demand to know why she had been placed with the weakest candidates. She just picked up her gear bag and walked toward the Pod 7 barracks with that same calm expression she always wore. Varath watched her go and felt something that might have been pity if he had allowed himself such weakness. This human had traveled across the stars to join an elite program. She had no hope of completing, and she did not even seem to understand what a fool's errand she was on. In 3 days she would face her first real test in the Fulbsno Crucible simulation chamber, and then everyone would see what Varath already knew. Humans did not belong among the Coalition's warriors, and no amount of political pressure could change basic biology. He returned to his office and pulled up the training schedule for the week ahead. There were real soldiers who needed his attention, cadets with actual potential who deserved his guidance and expertise. The human could wait. She would fail soon enough, and then she would be sent home, and Varath would never have to think about Earth's pathetic attempt at producing warriors ever again. He was absolutely certain of this. After all, he had been training soldiers for 40 years, and he had never been wrong about a cadet's potential. He could spot weakness from across a room, and Captain Elise. Chun was nothing but weakness wrapped in soft skin and held together by misplaced optimism. The crucible would break her, just like it broke everyone who was not strong enough to face it. And when it did, Varath would be there to file the paperwork and send her home where she belonged. He almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The Crucible was the most feared place in the entire Galactic Coalition Combat Academy, and every trainee who walked through its doors understood that their life was about to change forever. It sat at the heart of Station Nexus 7 like a sleeping beast, a massive spherical chamber wrapped in 3 layers of reinforced plating and powered by its own dedicated reactor core. The technology inside was so advanced that even the engineers who maintained it did not fully understand how it worked. The chamber contained an adaptive simulation system that could recreate any environment from any world in Coalition space. It could generate heat and cold, light and darkness, sound and silence. It could create walls and floors and ceilings that felt completely solid, even though they were made of nothing but hard light and force fields. But the true horror of the Crucible was not its physical simulations. The true horror was its artificial intelligence, a learning system that had been fed data from 10,000 years of military history across hundreds of species. This AI analyzed each trainee who entered the chamber, studied their biology and psychology, identified their deepest fears and their hidden weaknesses, and then designed a scenario specifically meant to break them. Every species had different breaking points. The Krethians feared isolation above all else because their culture was built on pack bonds and family loyalty. The Crucible would trap them alone in vast empty spaces until their minds cracked from loneliness. The Velari feared stillness because their 4-legged bodies were designed for constant motion. The Crucible would paralyze them and force them to lie motionless while threats circled just out of reach. The Nexari feared silence because their species communicated through subsonic vibrations. The Crucible would seal them in soundproof rooms where they could not even hear their own heartbeats. Whatever your species feared most, the Crucible would find it and use it against you. The current scenario that Command had selected for the certification test was called Nexus Collapse, and it held a failure rate of 99.2% across all species ever tested. The scenario simulated being trapped inside a deteriorating space station with cascading system failures, dwindling oxygen supplies, and a time-locked airlock that would only open if the trainee solved a series of increasingly complex problems. Most trainees failed within the first hour. Some failed within minutes, overwhelmed by the panic of watching their air supply tick down while alarms screamed and lights flickered and the AI whispered doubts into their ears through hidden speakers. The fastest successful completion on record had been achieved by a Vrexian hive mind specialist, who had finished the scenario in 4.7 hours. This was considered an almost miraculous achievement because Vrexians could split their consciousness across multiple thought streams and process information faster than any other known species. No single-minded species had ever completed Nexus collapse in under 6 hours. Most never completed it at all. When Vorath saw Captain Chun's name appear on the Crucible roster for the following day, he leaned back in his chair and let out a long, slow breath. Part of him wanted to intervene and remove her from the schedule because sending a human into Nexus collapse was like sending a child into a war zone. But another part of him, the part that had grown tired of political interference and diplomatic gestures, wanted to see what would happen. Perhaps watching the human fail spectacularly would finally convince Command that Earth soldiers did not belong in elite coalition programs. Perhaps her failure would be the evidence he needed to prevent future humans from wasting everyone's time. He approved her slot on the roster and sent a notification to the medical bay, asking them to have a trauma recovery team standing by. Humans were known to be psychologically fragile, and the Crucible had broken stronger minds than hers. That night, Vorath reviewed Chun's personnel file one more time, searching for anything that might explain why Command had chosen her specifically for this program. Her military record showed standard Earth training with nothing particularly impressive, just the usual progression from basic combat school through officer certification. There were a few notes about something called stress inoculation training and references to psychological evaluation scores that seemed unusually high. But Vorath did not understand Earth's testing methods well enough to know what these numbers meant. He set the file aside and told himself it did not matter. Tomorrow the Crucible would reveal the truth about humanity's so-called warriors, and then everyone could stop pretending that Earth belonged among the Coalition's military powers. The morning came quickly, and Vorath arrived at the Crucible control room early to ensure all systems were functioning properly. He was not looking forward to watching the human fail, but he wanted to document everything carefully so his report to Command would be thorough and undeniable. Other instructors filtered into the observation area as word spread that a human was about to attempt Nexus collapse. No one wanted to miss this because no human had ever faced the Crucible before, and everyone was curious to see how the strange soft creatures from Earth would react to real pressure. Bets were quietly exchanged. Someone wagered that the human would last 12 minutes before triggering a panic response. Someone else bet she would not even make it past the initial alarm sequence. A Krethian instructor offered odds of 50-1 against her completing the scenario at all. Vorath did not participate in the betting because it seemed beneath his dignity, but privately he agreed with the most pessimistic predictions. Humans simply were not built for this kind of challenge, and no amount of determination could overcome basic biological limitations. He watched on the display screen as Captain Chen walked down the corridor toward the Crucible's entrance. Her small figure dwarfed by the massive reinforced doors that stood between her and the most feared training exercise in the known galaxy. She paused at the threshold and looked up at the door for a long moment. And then, to everyone's surprise, she smiled. She actually smiled as if she was excited about what was coming. The door slid open, and Captain Elise Chen walked into the Crucible without hesitation, without fear, without any of the trembling that usually marked a trainee's first encounter with the chamber's terrible purpose. The door sealed behind her. The scenario began, and in the control room, Senior Instructor Vorath leaned forward to watch the human break. The moment Captain Chun entered the crucible, the chamber came alive with chaos. Emergency alarms screamed through hidden speakers as red warning lights painted the simulated corridor in bloody crimson. The floor shook beneath her feet as somewhere deep in the virtual space station, a reactor began its countdown to critical failure. Air vents hissed with the sound of escaping atmosphere, and a computerized voice announced that hull breach was imminent in Sector 7. Vorath watched the human's biometric readings on his display and felt a grim satisfaction as her heart rate immediately spiked to dangerous levels. Her cortisol production increased by 200% and her blood pressure rose sharply as her primitive mammalian brain flooded her system with stress hormones. This was exactly what was supposed to happen. This was the fear response that the crucible was designed to trigger. I would keep pushing her stress levels higher and higher until her cognitive functions degraded, and she made a fatal mistake. It was a process that usually took between 30 minutes and 3 hours, depending on the species. But with humans being so psychologically fragile, it might happen even faster. But then something unexpected occurred. Vorath blinked at his display and refreshed the data because surely the sensors were malfunctioning. The readings showed that Chun's heart rate was actually dropping, falling from its initial panic spike down to a steady rhythm that seemed almost relaxed. Her breathing slowed to a controlled pattern, and her cortisol levels stabilized rather than continuing to climb. This made no biological sense. The crucible was designed to trigger escalating fear responses, and yet the human's body was doing the exact opposite. She was calming down in the middle of a crisis simulation that had broken warriors from species far more formidable than her own. Vorath pulled up the visual feed from inside the chamber, and what he saw made his scales tighten against his skin. Chen was standing perfectly still in the middle of the chaotic corridor, her eyes closed and her hands relaxed at her sides. She was not running or panicking or desperately searching for an exit like every other trainee who had faced this scenario. She was just standing there, breathing slowly, as if the screaming alarms and flashing lights did not exist. Then her eyes opened, and Vorath saw something in them that he did not understand, something that looked almost like anticipation, like eagerness, like she had been waiting for this moment her entire life. She moved. The way she moved was unlike anything Vorath had ever seen from a human. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation, no second-guessing. She walked directly to a wall panel and began working on the circuitry inside with fingers that did not shake even slightly. The AI responded by increasing the difficulty, triggering a secondary alarm and filling the corridor with smoke that should have reduced visibility to near zero. Chen simply pulled a piece of fabric from her uniform, tied it around her face, and kept working. The AI escalated again, adding the sound of approaching footsteps and hostile voices from somewhere deeper in the station. Any other trainee would have abandoned their work to find cover or prepare for combat, but Chun did not even look up from the panel. She finished her repairs in under 2 minutes and moved on to the next objective. Vorath felt his primary heart skip a beat. She was not following any procedure in the Coalition manual. She was improvising solutions that the AI had never encountered before, using techniques that seemed almost primitive but were devastatingly effective. She rerouted power through circuits that were never designed to carry it. Jury-rigged life support systems using nothing but wire and determination, and solved navigation problems by methods that the AI, as predictive algorithms, could not anticipate. The other instructors in the control room had stopped talking. Everyone was staring at their displays with expressions of confusion and disbelief as the human moved through the simulated station like she had built it herself. She was not just surviving the scenario, she was dismantling it piece by piece with a methodical efficiency that bordered on terrifying. The Crucible's AI began running hot as it struggled to keep up with her. The system pulled more processing power from the station's reserves and generated new obstacles faster than it had ever needed to before. Walls collapsed in her path, and she climbed over them. Doors sealed shut, and she cut through them. The oxygen timer accelerated, and she found a way to slow it down. Vorath checked the difficulty rating and felt his blood run cold. The AI had escalated to 340% of standard difficulty, a level that had never been reached in the history of the Nexus collapse scenario. The system was throwing everything it had at this single human trainee, and she was still advancing, still solving problems, still refusing to break. What was she? This was not normal human behavior. This was not the fragile, soft creature that Vorath had evaluated during orientation. He pulled up her psychological profile again, and this time he read it more carefully, searching for anything that might explain what he was witnessing. There were references to something Earth's military called combat flow state, and notes about human performance under pressure that seemed almost unbelievable. One entry caught his attention. Subject demonstrates enhanced cognitive function during high-stress scenarios. Performance increases rather than degrades when facing mortal threat. Recommend assignment to high-pressure operations. Enhanced cognitive function during high-stress scenarios? Performance that increased rather than degraded? Vorath had trained species from across the galaxy, and he had never encountered such a thing. Every creature he had ever known became slower and stupider when death was near, because fear was supposed to protect you by making you cautious, by making you retreat, by making you submit to threats you could not overcome. But this human was not becoming slower or stupider. She was becoming faster and sharper and more dangerous with every passing minute. On the display screen, Captain Chun reached the final objective marker and began working on the time-locked airlock. The AI threw one last desperate barrage of obstacles at her, collapsing the ceiling and cutting her off from her tools and filling the room with a high-pitched noise designed to disrupt concentration. She did not even flinch. Vorath realized his claws had extended without his permission, an unconscious threat response triggered by something deep in his instincts. Something was very wrong here. Something about this human was not what it seemed. And for the first time in 40 years, Senior Instructor Vorath felt afraid of a trainee. The airlock opened. The simulation ended. The crucible's alarms fell silent, and the flashing red lights faded to a calm neutral, white as the chamber recognized that the scenario had been completed. The AI powered down its threat generation systems and began compiling its performance report. Vorath stared at the timer display and felt as if reality itself had cracked open beneath his feet. 11 minutes and 43 seconds. That was the human's completion time, 11 minutes. The previous record for Nexus collapse had been 4.7 hours, and that had been achieved by a Vrexian hive mind. A being capable of running 17 parallel thought processes simultaneously. Captain Elise Chun had shattered that record by a factor of 25 using nothing but a single human brain. The control room was completely silent. Every instructor present was frozen in place, their eyes fixed on displays that showed information they could not process. Some had their mouths hanging open in expressions of naked shock. Others had gone pale as the implications of what they had witnessed began to sink in. Vorath refreshed his display 3 times because the numbers could not possibly be correct. He ran a full diagnostic on the Crucible systems and checked the AI's decision logs and verified that every sensor was functioning within normal parameters. There were no errors. There were no malfunctions. The chamber had operated at full capacity and had escalated to difficulty levels never before reached in its entire operational history. And the human had simply walked through it like she was taking a morning stroll. The massive doors of the Crucible slid open, and Captain Chun stepped out into the corridor, her uniform slightly singed from the smoke and her hair disheveled from exertion, but otherwise completely unharmed. She wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand and looked around at the gathered instructors with an expression of mild curiosity. "That was a solid sim," she said, in that casual tone humans used. "That for unimportant observations. Reminded me of my qualifying exams back on Earth. Actually, is there somewhere I can get some water?" She was asking for water. She had just accomplished something that should have been biologically impossible, and she was asking for water as if nothing remarkable had happened. Vorath found that his voice would not work properly. His throat had constricted in a way that he did not understand, and his hands were trembling slightly as he gripped the edge of his control console. One of the junior instructors managed to direct Chun toward the recovery area where refreshments were available, and the human nodded her thanks and walked away with that same easy stride she always used, completely oblivious to the fact that she had just shaken the foundations of everything the Academy believed about species capability. The moment she was out of sight, the control room erupted. Instructors began talking over each other in a dozen different languages, demanding explanations and accusing each other of tampering with the equipment. Someone called for an immediate investigation into the crucibles programming, while someone else insisted that the human must have cheated somehow, even though no one could explain how such cheating would be possible. Vorath ignored them all. He retreated to his private office and sealed the door behind him, needing silence to think, needing space to understand what he had just witnessed. He pulled up Chun's complete personnel file and began reading every document that Earth's military had provided, searching for answers in the dense technical language that humans used to describe themselves. There, buried in the psychological evaluation section, he found a passage that made his scales stand on end. Subject displays textbook persistence predator psychology consistent with human evolutionary heritage. Ancestors evolved as endurance hunters on high-gravity death world. Psychological adaptation allows maintenance of cognitive function under sustained survival pressure. See cross-reference documents on stress inoculation and learned helplessness resistance and adrenaline-enhanced performance. Persistence predator. Vorath had heard the term before, but had never truly understood what it meant. Most coalition species had evolved from prey animals who developed intelligence as a survival mechanism. Creatures who learned to think their way out of danger because they could not fight their way out. But humans had evolved differently. Humans had evolved as hunters, as predators, as creatures who did not flee from danger, but instead pursued it across vast distances until their prey collapsed from exhaustion and terror. He searched the Coalition archives for more information and found a classified xenobiology report that required 7 security clearances to access. Normally, such a document would be beyond his authorization level, but the system granted him emergency access based on his status as Chen's supervising instructor. The report was written by a Coalition researcher who had spent 3 years studying human psychology, and its conclusions were deeply disturbing. Human cognition does not degrade linearly under threat, the report stated. Standard species show predictable cognitive decline as stress increases, following a curve that allows accurate prediction of breaking points and failure modes. Humans do not follow this curve. In approximately 63% of human subjects tested, existential pressure triggered enhanced pattern recognition and accelerated problem-solving capabilities. Heart rate and stress hormones increased as expected, but cognitive performance improved rather than declined. Subjects reported experiencing mortal danger as exciting or clarifying, rather than as paralyzing or overwhelming. This response appears to be evolutionary in origin. Human ancestors survived not by avoiding predators, but by becoming more effective hunters when threatened. The stress response that causes most species to freeze or flee instead causes humans to focus and engage. Recommendation: exercise extreme caution when placing humans in high-pressure training environments. Standard breaking point calculations do not apply. Systems designed to induce failure may instead produce optimal human performance. Vorath set down his datapad and stared at the wall of his office for a long time. The Crucible had been designed to break soldiers, to teach them humility and survival through controlled suffering. It had functioned perfectly for 3 centuries and had produced some of the finest warriors in Coalition history. And the humans treated it like a game. They treated mortal danger like a game. A species that got smarter when you tried to kill them. A species whose fear response made them more dangerous instead of less. What had the Coalition invited into its ranks? What had Earth actually sent them? Vorath realized that his claws had extended again, and that his breathing had become rapid and shallow. These were prey responses. He knew. Ancient instincts inherited from ancestors who had survived by recognizing predators before the predators recognized them. He was exhibiting prey responses to a human, to a species that most Coalition members considered barely more than clever animals. The implications were staggering, and Vorath needed to understand them before anyone else. Before Command, before the other instructors, before the politicians who had so casually inserted a human into his elite training program. He began composing a priority message to Coalition military intelligence. They needed to know what he had discovered. Everyone needed to know. That night, long after the other instructors had gone to their quarters and the Academy had fallen into the quiet rhythm of the sleep cycle, Senior Instructor Vorath sat alone in his office surrounded by datapads and classified documents. He had spent hours searching through the Coalition xenobiology archives, pulling every file related to Earth and its strange, soft inhabitants. What he found had driven sleep from his mind and replaced it with a cold, creeping dread that settled into his bones like ice. The humans had been classified as a Level 2 civilization when they first made contact with the Coalition 6 years ago, a rating that indicated primitive technology and limited threat potential. They had been welcomed into the galactic community with the same patronizing kindness that all newly spacefaring species received. Treated like children who would need centuries of guidance before they could truly participate in interstellar affairs. But the classification was wrong. The classification was catastrophically, terrifyingly wrong. Vorath found a threat assessment document buried under 17 security clearances, a file so restricted that even those Coalition admirals did not have access to it. The document was titled Terran Humans, Threat Assessment, Pending Review, and its contents made his scales itch with primal unease. Unlike most sapient species, the document began, humans did not evolve from prey animals seeking safety through intelligence. They evolved as pursuit predators on a Class 12 death world, a planet with crushing gravity and extreme temperature variations and a biosphere so hostile that 99% of all species that ever existed there went extinct. The human ancestors did not run from danger. They followed it. They developed a hunting strategy called persistence predation, in which they would select prey and then follow it across vast distances for days at a time, never stopping, never resting, until the target collapsed from exhaustion and fear. Their bodies evolved to support this strategy. Humans can regulate their internal temperature through sweating, allowing them to remain active in heat that would incapacitate other species. Their bipedal gait is inefficient for sprinting, but extraordinarily efficient for sustained movement over long distances. Their joints and bones are reinforced to withstand repetitive impact that would cripple most other sapient beings. But the most significant adaptation is psychological. Vorath read the next section 3 times because he could not believe what he was seeing. Human psychology is built around pursuit. Their minds do not process threat the way other species do. When faced with danger that cannot be immediately escaped, most sapient beings experience escalating fear that eventually triggers submission or catatonic withdrawal. Humans experience something different. When a human cannot flee from danger, their psychology shifts into what researchers call fight or flight, but which is more accurately described as fight or pursue. The human brain floods with chemicals that increase focus, accelerate reaction time, and suppress pain response. Fear becomes fuel rather than paralysis. Most critically, humans appear to experience life-threatening situations as psychologically rewarding. Post-incident interviews with human test subjects revealed that many described near-death experiences as thrilling or exciting, or the most alive I have ever felt. Some subjects actively sought out dangerous situations in order to experience this psychological state again. Researchers initially believed this was a malfunction, a broken fear response that would be evolutionarily disadvantageous. Further study revealed the opposite. This response allowed human ancestors to pursue dangerous prey without hesitation, to continue hunting even when injured, to engage threats that should have sent them fleeing. Recommendation: reclassify Terran humans from Threat Level 2 to Threat Level pending comprehensive review. Current assessment models do not adequately capture human psychological capabilities. Exercise extreme caution in all military and training contexts. The document ended with a note that had been added recently, time-stamped just 3 months ago. Update: Coalition War College has begun modeling scenarios involving human military integration. Preliminary results are classified level maximum. All personnel are reminded that speculation about human capabilities outside official channels is prohibited. Vorath set down the datapad with hands that would not stop shaking. He thought about Captain Chun standing in the crucible, her heart rate dropping as the alarm screamed and the walls collapsed around her. He thought about the smile she had worn as she walked through doors designed to break the strongest warriors in the galaxy. He thought about how she had asked for water like she had just finished a light workout rather than accomplished the impossible. She had not been afraid. She had not even been challenged. The Crucible, the Academy's greatest psychological weapon, had been nothing but a pleasant exercise for her. And she was just one human. Earth had 8 billion more. Vorath thought about what it would mean if humans ever went to war. Not the small border conflicts that the Coalition occasionally engaged in, but real war, total war, the kind of extinction-level violence that had ended species in ages past. A species that got stronger when you threatened them. A species that felt joy in the face of death. A species whose ancestors had hunted everything else on their planet into submission or extinction, and then, when they ran out of prey, had started hunting each other. The Coalition had invited these creatures into their military academies and given them access to advanced weapons technology and treated them like backward primitives who should be grateful for the opportunity. What had they done? Tomorrow there would be questions. Command would want to know why Vorath had not flagged the human's potential during her initial evaluation. Why he had assigned her to Pod 7 with the marginal candidates. Why the Academy's perfect record now included an 11-minute anomaly that made no sense according to any standard model of species capability. He would have to explain that he had been wrong. He would have to admit that 40 years of experience had taught him nothing about what humans truly were. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, Senior Instructor Vorath sat in his darkened office and contemplated a species barely out of their evolutionary cradle. A species still learning to walk among the stars. A species whose children treated the Coalition's most feared training exercise as a qualifying exam. He had always believed that the Coalition represented the pinnacle of galactic civilization, the combined might and wisdom of thousands of species refined over millions of years. He had believed that his people were the hunters and that any threat could be contained, through superior technology and superior numbers. But humans did not think like coalition species. Humans did not fear like coalition species. And for the first time in his long career, Varth understood what it felt like to be prey. He understood that somewhere on Station Nexus 7, a human was sleeping peacefully after the most exhilarating day of her training, dreaming of challenges yet to come, completely unaware that she had fundamentally altered how one senior instructor viewed the entire galaxy. Or perhaps she was aware. Perhaps this was exactly what Earth had intended when they sent their warrior to join the hazard response program. Perhaps the humans had known all along what would happen when the coalition finally saw what they could do. And that thought, more than anything else, was what kept Varth awake until dawn. The horror was not that humans were dangerous. The horror was that they had been dangerous all along. And no one in the entire coalition had realized it until an unremarkable human female had walked into the crucible and walked out 11 minutes later with a smile on her face. The horror was that humanity was just getting started,